And go on, please.
Ja,
Christian.
godt. Goddag eller god aften, og velkommen til denne her seance, som vi har set meget frem til, og hvor Harry har været så dygtig at få introduceret og få overtalt Bill Pettit til at deltage. Og jeg vil lige lave en kort introduktion af Dr. Pettit, som indtil for nylig har arbejdet som psykiater, men som allerede i 1983 inddrog de tre principper som et bærende element i sin praksis. I denne kapacitet har Dr. Pettit holdt foredrag og undervist i USA, i Canada, Europa og Sydafrika blandt andet. Og for kort tid siden besluttede Dr. Pettit sig til at dedikere sit liv alene til udbredelsen af principperne, og har i den forbindelse han etableret et kursus i samarbejde med sin kone Linda, der også arbejder arbejder som psykolog ligeledes med fokus på de her tre principper. Min egen introduktion til Bill Pettit kom i november måned 2014 i Salt Spring Island, hvor vi var over til en 3-dages seance på den skole, som blev grundlagt i samarbejde med Sydney Banks og Chip Chipman og Elsie Spittle. Og jeg husker meget tydeligt, jeg blev meget bevæget over den samtale, jeg havde med Bill Pettit, som fortalte om de tre principper, men som frem for alt gjorde meget stort understregede meget, hvor vigtigt det var, at man fastholdt den renhed, der ligger i budskabet. Fordi det er den renhed i budskabet, der er medvirkende til at have den transformerende effekt, som budskabet har, når den bliver overbragt på den rigtige måde. Og jeg tror, at med den her ganske korte introduktion, så vil jeg gerne give ordet videre til Harry Dabitsky, som jo er co-host på det her webinar, og har været det, siden vi startede det i juni måned. And I think with these words, Harry, I would like to pass over the words to you for that introduction, which you want to do.
Okay, good to see everybody. Christian mentioned it, but the concept of the show is not that it's a top-down process. We're not here just to listen to Bill. He has a lot to share, and we all understand that. But it's important to understand that we're emphasizing not only questions, but points of view and discussion. And the more that happens, what I've noticed, the more you share, the more you grow. And so it's not only about Bill growing and listening to him and the feeling he brings, but what we can bring. And it's been my opinion that the Danish people do like to express their point of view on different things. So remember, this is participant oriented rather than just guest oriented. And I really want to emphasize that. And in the early days when Sid had his enlightenment experience, we talked about the spiritual nature of the principles. And there were no psychologists or psychiatrists who were around at that time. But it was amazing to me that a man with a grade 9 education and no real spiritual background had this enlightenment experience. And I sort of been thinking about it and seeing it like Einstein came up with this formula, everything is energy, E = mc squared. And his dream was to find a unified principle of life. And it's hard to believe, but a grade 9 educated welder actually did come up with the formula of the unified formula of life. And it's universal mind plus universal consciousness plus universal thought equals reality, all reality. And within that context, it's so applicable to so many different areas. And Bill's speciality, of course, is in the psychiatric world or the psychology world, and relating it back to the three principles and the spiritual understanding that Sydney Banks uncovered. It's rewarding to listen to someone like Bill, because what happens, I first heard Bill about the year 2000, and I had zero interest in psychology and psychiatry. I've never taken a course in it, and I've never wanted to take a course in it. So I found it to be extremely boring to talk about the problems of people and then making them happy. It seemed easier just to go to happiness. or what Sid emphasized. But when I went to this conference and I listened to Bill, I said, if I'm going to listen, I might as well listen to the top person instead of going da, 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 da. And I went and listened to that talk. And after Bill talked for about an hour and a half, and yeah, he did have a few stories, as he mentioned, I felt like I had gone from zero to almost like the top understanding of what psychiatry was. I felt really good about that. It's so easy to jump levels because if we're not thinking, time is irrelevant. And I found that in my own personal life, and I want to emphasize that to people here. I became an expert or a leading person in the native world. I'm not a native. I have no background in it. It wasn't a restriction. I've done the same in the working with the heavily addicted. I've never been addicted. I've never taken a psychology course. It's not a restriction. With these three principles, the understanding comes from inside you. And I don't understand how it works. So I'm not trying to tell you that I do. All I know is that it works. And this understanding grows and grows. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Bill, but we feel very honored that you came to this room. We're really pleased about that. And I was very excited that you agreed to come on, and obviously a few other Danish people are as well. So go ahead, Bill.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Harry. Wow. Well, not to compare me with Sid in any way, except that we're human beings. And there's a part of me that as I sit here today with you, I too am honored to be with you and to be asked to be with you. But I'm afraid I'll just say the same thing that same things over and over, and it'll be boring, you know. So I'm hopeful that wisdom will guide me to make this rich for those of you that have come to be here. It would help me. I mean, it doesn't have to take more than 2 or 3 minutes, but it would help me, maybe 5 at the most. It would help me to have people be able to be unmuted and to ask a question that they would like to have answered during my thought, Harry, I'm really fine. I could go for 25 minutes maybe or so, and then just start the discussion. I want to honor your thought of having plenty of time for discussion, but it would be helpful to me, even for those 25 minutes, to have some on the back burner, if you will, maybe 3 or 4 questions that people might have in their mind that they'd like to at least be addressed today.
Well, I have one. The topic is the cure for mental illness.
Okay.
And you were the first person who coined that phrase. And to be honest, I think that is in itself a very interesting question of what you mean by that.
Okay. Anybody else?
So if you want to say something or ask a question, please unmute yourself or wave your hand or go in the participants below, click that, and you can wave your hand electronically. Or you can write a question in the chat. So feel free to do whatever you feel like.
Usually, Bill, the Danes like to get into once the conversation starts. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to do that, and so the cure for mental illness. Well, that's a pretty bold statement, and I would think raises lots of questions. So, if the first thing is really that, and what it'll be, I've really been moved recently. My writing of my book got bigger and bigger, and my daughter-in-law said, you know, as I listen to you and my mother, what I hear is a series of smaller books, maybe 50 to 70 pages. And I think maybe the first one is going to be Beyond Trauma and Resilience, Finding Freedom from the Past. Because a lot of people haven't found freedom from the past, whether it's grief or guilt or resentment. But I think the second one would be one cause and one cure, which is, I know, a bold statement, and it'll hopefully cause an opening of an international dialogue, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Some of you have met Dr. Kessel. Anybody know who Dr. Anthony Kessel? He was the director of the Mental Health Day in London. And he has the equivalent, and I'm sure there's one equivalent in Denmark, you'd have to tell me, but he has the equivalent in the United Kingdom of the director of the Center for Disease Control in the United States, in Atlanta, the CDC. Well, he has that equivalent place in the United Kingdom, and is really part of the global health initiative, and a lot of his people that he knows were involved in this this study of global health and morbidity and mortality that culminated in a series of articles in Lancet in 2016. And it cost, God knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars it cost. It was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, who certainly seem to have their heart in the right place. And it was a study of the morbidity and mortality in 195 countries, from sub-Saharan Africa to the upper socioeconomic. And I won't go into that, but Dr. Kessel and I were talking, and he also had that feeling that we need to maybe take it one piece at a time. And when I say there's one cause of mental illness, it's chronic mental stress. And the reason it's chronic mental stress is because if we spend even 2 to 3 minutes giving attention to upsetting thoughts, and this has been done with PET scans and fMRIs from 30 years ago, it activates what's called the stress response, the fight or flight response. And that fight or flight response is meant to be activated in life-threatening emergencies. When our life is in danger and somebody else's life dear to us is in danger. That's what it's meant for. And it's meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for up to 30 minutes. It could probably go another 30 without too much damage if it stopped then. But after 30 minutes, it starts being non-productive, and it necessitates other parts of the body, literally different genes, to be turned on. Only 5,000 of our 25,000 genes are on at any time. They're like if you had a big hall with light bulbs, with 25,000 light bulbs, only 5,000 of them would be lit. And so you want the healthiest protective genes lit so that your machine of your body, this form that our formless energy has taken, you want it to run smoothly and effectively. And, Sid would say, some people think that God is in the inside, and then your body's on the outside. But he made it very clear that in The Missing Link and other places that it's the same energy in different disguise. It's all divine energy. Everything is all divine energy. And if we do that, it's meant to, and some of you have heard me tell this story a few months ago, it's what you hear. Literally, one of my relatives was under on my wife's side, was under the car, working under his car, and the jack gave way, and the car came crashing down on his chest. And his 5'2", 125-year-old 8th grade son, activating that response, seeing his father's life in danger, lifted the car up and a neighbor pulled him out with minimal injury. That's what it's for. It's not for what many of the clients that I see who I ask them to rate themselves on in the past on guilt, resentment, and grief, unresolved grief, and in the future on worry and overanalyzing, and on the present on being upset when they're not the way they want them to be, things aren't the way they want them to be. Then I ask them how many hours they sleep, and I ask them how many of those awake, let's say 18 hours that you're awake, how many of them are you in giving attention to stressful thinking? Many will say 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. And sometimes somebody who's having panic attacks and all kinds of physical symptoms, they'll say, well, maybe 20 to 30 minutes. And I don't think at that moment that they're lying to me. I think that they're like the fish in the water, that if you ask the fish about the water, the fish would say, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean water? Because it's where they've lived for so long, it's become normal. So then I reverse the question a little bit and I say, of the 18 hours that you're awake, how many of them are you at a quiet peace? That's when they often look at me like I am from another planet. You know, Sid would say it wasn't that he was against meditation as a technique, but he would say as your understanding of the spiritual nature of these principles increases, and remember, he said, you know, when I hear people say, and God knows I said it myself 35 years ago, 34, I said, when I hear people say, oh, I really understand the principles, I go, oh, okay. Good luck with that, you know, because for what Sid said was, there's an infinite number of doors of understanding the spiritual nature of these principles. And you've probably heard me say that the last time I looked at my math book, that's a really, really big number. That's supposed to be a joke, folks. You know you're in trouble. Me and Mark Howard are the only two people I know that have to let people know when they've told a joke. Anyway, so what you're really looking for is to live in a meditative state, to live in a quieter mind, so that spiritual energy that Sid said is guiding us every moment of our life. I listened with my granddaughter recently, my 18-year-old granddaughter, who just graduated from high school, and she was struggling a little bit. And so my wife, Linda, you know, I didn't even think of it. I have to give Linda total. She said, Bill, we should ask her if she'd like to come out and spend 2 weeks with us. And of course, as soon as she said that, when you hear wisdom from somebody else, you go, yeah, gosh, yeah, of course. Why didn't I think of that? You know, but I was grateful that she had. And my granddaughter went back, and let's just say that her relationship with her mother and everything in her life it's like she's going in a different direction. And she sent me emails the other day, said, Grandpa, thank you so much for having me listen to those Long Beach tapes of Mr. Banks, because it's really changed my life. I have angry thoughts now, but I don't have to give them attention, and life seems much more gentler than it ever used to be. So to get to the point, this spiritual, what we are is spiritual, is divine energy and form, and that can't get mentally ill. It's impossible. It's formless. Now, we have a brain, and that brain is a computer. It's a computer. And can you have damage to the computer? Can you have brain injury? Yeah. Can you have developmental disabilities and be what we used to call mentally retarded, so that your IQ quotient, your brain in the ways that some people, the rational analytical part doesn't work as efficiently as others, of course. Can you actually get dementia to where the computer isn't working well again at all? Yes, you can. But I'm going to suggest to you that that doesn't have anything to do with mental well-being. And I'll give you some examples. Mental well-being is a feeling of okayness. It's a feeling of connectedness. It's a feeling of freedom to give the love that you have in your heart and to let other people love you. It's really not rocket science. For 7 years, I was a consultant to the state hospital in South Dakota for the developmentally disabled and those with autism, which, by the way, is not a mental illness. It's just a different processor, and it may have some evolutionary advantages as we get to, as understanding increases. It may be the processor that most people are going to need 50 years from now, with the exponential increase of data analytics and all this. But those people that had IQs at that hospital of 30 and 40 and 50, they were just like you and I. They had their good days and their bad days. They had their times when they were in their right mind, really connected to their divine energy, their source, and other times that they'd thought themselves away from it. No difference. I have a friend, I had a friend in Bradenton, Florida when I was there. His mother-in-law, and some of you may have heard this story, but it's a powerful example. Well, I'll tell both sides. I was asked to see a man who had, in his almost 90 years old, who had been married almost 70 years to his wife. And they got in an argument over whether or not to sell some land. Here he is, 90 years old. And he had dementia. And he got so angry, he beat her almost to death. She almost died with a lamppost. And they sent her into prison. It was probably a forensic prison, and I'm sure he died there. But he would have hallucinations, which people often have when their computer gets and all a hallucination is, by the way, is a thought with special effects. But he would have them, and he would have horrible ones of fire and the devil coming crashing through the windows and chasing him, and he would have these horrible hallucinations. And they were terrifying to him and fearful. But what I learned about him is that, sadly, he had been a very unhappy man his whole life. He'd been argumentative. He'd been, it's always my way or the highway. It was always, if you don't see things the way I do, then you're wrong. And he was very a miserable person. Now, my friend's mother-in-law, on the other hand, was just a loving, delightful, joyful, a lighthearted, incredibly peaceful woman. And she got dementia, and she had hallucinations. Now, I don't know if this will mean anything to people in Denmark. She would have hallucinations of the Pillsbury Doughboy. Pillsbury Doughboy is a big, soft, I think it was in Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, if you remember that. It was a big, soft, mushy doughboy. And she would have hallucinations of giant flowers, very beautiful flowers. And her husband they'd be traveling, and he would not be able to lock the door from the inside, and he'd run to get something from the car, and she would sneak out of the motel, and then she would play hide and seek with him trying to get him to find her. And one time he asked her, they had been married almost 60 years. He said to her, "Betty, what is my name?" And she looked at him and she said, "Oh, you know that's not what's important." Now, folks, I'm telling you, that lady still had her mental well-being. Now, what happens? What happens if we activate that stress response for hours every day? I did it for 6 to 9 hours a day for 21 years until I sat on April Fool's Day and listened to Sydney Banks in San Francisco on April Fool's Day, 1983. And many of you have heard me say I had 26 and a half years of schooling. I had degrees on my wall that said I was a board-certified psychiatrist. I'd had 800 lectures on mental illness and not one single lecture on mental health. And yet in our country, they called me a mental health professional. That would be like calling somebody an electrician who had never had one course in how electricity worked. And yet that's what I was called, a mental health professional. And I sat in front of Mr. Banks for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I realized, as Harry spoke, that this man who was allowed by whatever you want to call divine mind, whatever label you want to give on that, he was allowed to have a glimpse into the principles at the source of the universe. I knew that he knew 10,000 times, and that was an underestimate, more about mental health than I did. Because when my understanding was damn close to zero, it doesn't take very much for it to be 10,000 times more.
So what turned the switch on for you, Bill?
You know, I don't know that I know, Harry. The switch just went on. When you talk truth, when somebody's talking truth, and if we are indeed that same divine energy, and that awakens what you already have inside of you. You know, this past Friday, I spent talking with a man, and so long story how I got to be. His mother was there too. She's in her late 60s and back in the Midwest, and he's 42, and he had been in and out of state mental hospitals for many years. He's been in and out of prison. He has the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. And so something that she said to him allowed him to say, well, we would meet for 90 minutes. And so I wanted to make sure I had a student before I started talking, and he started talking, and he went into how the FBI and all these plots are against him, and all these delusions, paranoid delusions. And I listened for a while because I wanted to hear him out, but I finally said something, and I don't know what I said, but I said, you know, your mother is paying me some money, a fair amount of money today for this 90 minutes. And you've come here to for some reason, something gave you some hope that there might be something here today. So I'm going to ask if you're willing to listen for a while and see if we can awaken some hope that your life can be different than it is right now. And so he would listen for a while, and he'd listen for 5 or 6 minutes, and then he'd get into these thoughts again. He'd go back into his thoughts, and he'd start in, and this went on for the 90 minutes. And I just tried to stay present as to know when to talk and when to listen, and tried to be guided on that. And to my surprise, well, maybe less to my surprise, but to his mother's incredible surprise, at the end, as we were ending up, I read from Mr. Banks. I said, I'm going to read just a couple of pages from this book that if we meet, we would go through it page by page. And I said, and so I read Sid's introduction, which I'm sure most of you have read, to the missing link. There are those in this world, it's 10 lines. I'm not going to read you forever. There are those in this world who believe miracles do not happen. I can assure such skeptics that they do. With hope and faith as beacons, anything can happen. If these writings bring a second chance of life to just one human being, my work has not been in vain. And I read a little more, and I won't read all that I read, because I read a few pages, but I did read where the achievement of mental stability and peace of mind is one thought away from everyone on earth. And I read all the way to page 7, where at the bottom it said, all human psyches. You know, in psychology, is really supposed to be the study, is from the Greek roots for the study of the soul. Soul or mind being the spiritual aspect of the human being. Psychiatrist, ist, is one who, iatria is the word for cure. One who heals or cures the soul. One who heals the soul. That's what a psychiatrist is supposed to be. Now, my mischievousness when I taught the residents at West Virginia University, the psychiatry residents, when I had a course with them and that I taught, and I put the roots up, psyche and iatria and ist, and I said, does anybody know these Greek roots? I know they don't teach Latin and Greek anymore like they used to, but anybody know these roots? And the residents all said, no, I have no idea. I said, well, ist means one who, and the atria means one who chooses, and psyche is the Greek root for medication. So a psychiatrist is one who chooses the right medication. And they said, really? And I said, no. It's one who heals the soul. That's what it's supposed to be. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any others. No person's psyche, no exceptions. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. Now, I don't know how this story is going to end, but at the end of that 90 minutes, I got quiet and I asked him if he wanted to talk again and maybe go through that book. And he said, yes, I do. I would, if my mother's willing to pay for it, I would really like to learn more about what you're saying. I'm telling you, folks, it's always there. It can't be damaged. It can't be scratched. And if we had 4.5 more days or 8.5 more days, I could tell you about 400 stories of every diagnostic category that's in the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. And I could tell you stories of physical things that are beyond, they were beyond my belief. That one of the big things that they're seeing, and then I'm going to bring it to an end here in a minute or two, is that they're seeing one of the activation of the stress response, this emergency system. It increases chronically norepinephrine and noradrenaline, and adrenaline. So you get strokes, you get plaque laid down because of the high pressure. You get strokes, you get heart attacks, you get clotting, you get hyperclotting. If you were faced with a saber-toothed tiger with nothing in club, but a club in your hand, you wanted to be hyperclottable in your blood. So if he ripped into your shoulder, you wouldn't bleed to death. You could, with pressure later, if you got away, be able to stop the bleeding. It's not good to be hyperclottable for now when you're not facing a saber-toothed tiger. It means you clot arteries that shouldn't be clotted. You clot veins. You get deep vein thrombosis. You pour massive, massive amounts of glucose into your bloodstream. I listened to a thing yesterday that said in 1980 in the United States, type 2 diabetes among teenagers was unheard of. There's over 60,000 cases in teenagers now. Because when we activate the stress response, it pours massive I mean, for every molecule freed up of glucagon in the liver, it frees 100 million molecules of glucose into the bloodstream. And the pancreas finally says, I can't do this anymore. I can't work 20 hours a day. And people start, blood sugars start going up, and they get type 2 diabetes. And if you want to read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it's a brilliant book by a Stanford man. And he talks, a Stanford psychologist, Sapolsky, and he talks about how chronic activation of the stress response knocks out our immune system 40 to 70%. Our ability to fight off cancer cells, our ability to heal from surgery or injuries, our ability to fight off viruses or bacteria. Has anybody here but me noticed if you tried to push yourself or you got really mentally stressed, you got a cold, you came down with a flu or some virus? That's an early warning sign trying to go, wake up, right? So let me stop. So the other thing, the massive thing is inflammation, what they call the inflammatory response with all these cytokines, these tumor-related factor, all these different cytokines that get, and it ends up with fibromyalgia, autoimmune diseases, migraines, even osteoarthritis in the knee is not a wear and tear now, primarily. It's an inflammatory response. Ringing in the ears is an early warning sign that your whole body has got hyper-inflammatory response. Our bodies try to let us know because it is the same divine energy. Many of what we call diseases, most of what we call diseases are attempts of our body to try to wake us up, to quit doing what we're doing innocently with these beautiful principles and gifts that we've been given. But mental well-being is always present. It cannot be destroyed. And so the cure is to find an understanding where you allow it to come out and flourish rather than cover it over with, as Sid would say, the tangle of your erroneous thoughts. And with that, I'm going to put the paper clip on my lips and listen.
So please, if anyone has questions for Bill, please.
Or discussions, like Harry said, comments.
Discussions, comments.
Anything, yeah.
I'd like to just give my bit of it. Several years ago, I was at a seminar with Bill and Linda Pettit in London. The reason was that I very, very traumatic situation in my family, mental illness and stuff going on, and with my son, and I just encountered the principles at the time, and my son was going into paranoid schizophrenia, so he was seeing everyone was killers on the roof, and he got hospitalized, and we just couldn't really communicate, and it's a really scary thing. I had all this thinking about would he kill himself, blah blah, lots of stuff going on. So I saw that Bill and Linda came to London and held a 2-day seminar on mental health, and I just had this feeling I need to go there, so I did. And it was a very, very, it was one of the best things. It was so fantastic what happened, because I understood that, end of it all, I understood that all I could do in this case was be the loving father. And then I went home, and the really, really amazing thing was that we have the best relationship ever. It's stronger and more intimate in many ways. I'm not saying that he's totally well all the time, but it just changed. And I stopped having all this worry and thinking about it. And so he relaxed, and I really, the point there, because there was kind of, like you said, Bill, that the stress was out of the equation in a way. So everything started working more like a flow, a more natural energy. It was so beautiful, and so even if I don't really understand what happened, it certainly changed. It certainly changed my life, and I hope, and I can see it also a lot for my son. So it was a very strong and deep experience. I really cherish that, Bill. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Chris, and thank you so very much for sharing that. You know, I just have a couple of quick thoughts. Is that psychosis, divine mind is trying to come through every moment of our life, but we have a free will, like Sid says, and innocently our understanding varies, and so we pay attention to thoughts that are best not paid attention to. And things happen suddenly, we have sudden losses or things, and that we really get lost. And to me, psychosis is I have created such a painful world in my head that I have to go to another world. It may not be wonderful either, but my alternative in this world is to stop living, to take my life, or to go to another world to get some relief. Same thing with mania, manic episodes. Some of you have heard me say this, I've asked anybody that's had a hypomanic or manic episode if they remembered the last thing they remembered before they went into their mania or hypomania. And about 70, I'd say 75% of the people do remember, and they say, I was ready to take my life. The pain had gotten too unbearable. I was ready to take my life. So when you think about it, the mania was their friend. The mania kept them alive. One man was ready because he thought he had failed his family so much economically that he didn't want them to suffer after he was gone. So he was going to kill his wife, his 9 and 11-year-old boys, and then himself, out of the love he had for them. And fortunately, he went into a manic episode. And that usually not only saved 4 people's lives. When you're running around with no clothes on, or you're starting fires in the middle of the main street, or you're handing out $100 bills on the corner, you get attention really fast. And so you get help. So I think the other thing I'll say is I have a friend whose daughter had severe anorexia, and that has the highest mortality of any, quote, mental illness. And it really is just a lostness in pain, and they're trying to get some relief, just as people do from drugs and alcohol, or hoarding, or whatever that people do to try, or obsessive compulsive rituals. They're trying to get some relief from the pain they're innocently causing. And her daughter looked like she was going to die of depression and or of her eating disorder. And she got to a place, she understood the principles enough, she realized that she had no power to make that, and she realized she was eating herself up with worry and equating worry with love. And worry has zero to do with love. And she came to peace, and she realized, kind of like Chris just said, all I can do is, while she's alive, while I have her, is love her with all my heart and soul. And the less I'm encumbered by worry, there's more of me to love her. And her daughter recovered rather quickly, and later told her mother, the day you stopped worrying about me relieved such a burden from me, I was able to allow myself to heal. The day you stopped worrying about me relieved such a burden from my heart that I was able to heal, allow myself to heal.
Yeah, I can really feel what you just said. I think everyone can, can really feel what you're talking about here. It's a deep feeling of just being, it's okay. Just being loving is that's all that's needed.
Yes.
That's enough.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have something that you actually do have something you see, that a little thing that will make a difference. I had this woman.
Absolutely, Harry, absolutely. But you can't see it when you're caught up in your own worrisome thoughts.
Absolutely
Right.
correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was this woman, she was taking 22 drugs and diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar and about MS and about 6 other things. And she went into this, I could see her mind going into this state. And I've said this to a million people, but it actually had no effect on anyone. But I said, why don't you calm your mind down? And she ran into her bedroom and she came out about 10 minutes later and she said, I can't believe it. This is usually 2 weeks. This thing that I'm going into is and it's gone just like that. And it totally transformed her whole experience. She actually got off all the drugs and everything like that. And it was really such an innocent thing that I shared with her that I was actually, but she heard something very deep and her life was just different after that. And so, when you were talking, Bill, a feeling I had was peace of mind has a lot to do with mental health.
Oh, absolutely. That's the cure, Harry. The cure is peace of mind. The principles are the most reliable route to that, to me. Now, once you have peace of mind, you're free to give and receive love that you always have. You always have. I see people with huge hearts that are huge loving, but they're so caught up in pain in the past and worrying about the future and upset about the present that it keeps them from being and experiencing the love that they have to give and receive. But peace of mind, it's like it takes the cover off. It releases, this is true education, because back when we had those of us that had to learn the Latin roots, educere means to draw out what's inside. It doesn't mean putting anything in. It means awakening what's inside so it can come out. As Sid said, what you're looking for, you've always had, and it'll always be with you. And you can't lose it. It's always there. It's beautifully said, Harry.
And interesting, yesterday I taught at a heavily addicted section, and that is also the answer to heavy addiction.
Yeah, sometime we're going to have a discussion of what's heavy and what's light. It's a heavy addiction.
Take my word for it, Bill. I'm dealing with heavy.
Because what it is, any misuse of a substance is an attempt to try to get relief from the innocently created dis-ease inside from people's misuse of the 3 principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And people talk about, well, isn't it hereditary? I was twice certified in addictions in 1988 and again in 2004. And what's hereditary about addictions is if the 10 of us or 12 of us or 22 of us, if we all stressed ourselves out 8 to 10 hours a day, some of us would get some severe mental illness, but some of us would just feel so much dis-ease inside that we would go searching for something to give us relief, to neuroscience-wise, to awaken our reward system. in our amygdala. Now, some people find that alcohol does that. Other people have a few shots of alcohol and they spit it out and say that tastes like crap. But the first time they get a Vicodin for their badly sprained ankle, they go, oh my gosh, I'm home. And others find that when they starve themselves, they feel good. Others find when they eat and throw up, they actually, when people do that, when they eat and throw up, it actually increases the tryptophan in their body, which increases the serotonin. So whatever people are doing, some people get it by hoarding, get some relief by hoarding. Some people get by picking their hair, by picking their skin, by doing counting, checking, washing all day long. All of these, quote, addictions are just attempts to try to relieve the dis-ease. And as Harry said, the cure is always the same. It's peace of mind. And I'm not saying that people didn't come to peace of mind before Sid had his insight, but he's given us a reliable road and whenever there's principles are understood in any field, it has always helped that field, whether it's medicine or physics or chemistry. But these, as Harry pointed to, these are universal principles. Understanding these principles changes everything. 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 We have, this past week, I don't know if you saw that, where these two neutron stars collided. They collide. It happens in our galaxy once every 10,000 years. They collided, and they've been waiting for these, and they've got these sensors all around the world now. They all picked up these signs of these two neutron cores, which are left over after stars blow up in their supernova, and when they make iron, when these little cores are going around, and every 10,000 years in our galaxy, one of them collides, and that's what makes gold, platinum, uranium, all the really heaviest metals can't be formed without that. Tell me universal mind isn't working all the time. Now, they receive these signals all over the world. Try to wrap your mind around this or your brain around this. This collision happened 130 million years ago when the dinosaurs were on the planet. And it's now reaching the Earth, and had been going the speed of light for 130 million years and reached their sensor machines last week. If anybody wants to calculate how far away that is, lots of luck. There's universal principles. When you understand that there's universal principles that we are part of, that this whole conglomeration is one divine cell, and we're part of it. There's a feeling of connectedness that allows you to understand a lot of things that are not understandable before that.
Everything changes and nothing has changed.
Exactly, Chris. Exactly. It's just that our perception, our ability to be aware changes significantly. We see a different world. I'm talking to a 12-year-old boy from Europe, and he's so cute. We're going through the missing link, and he's saying, this is so cool. He said, it's like, until you see it, it doesn't exist for you, does it? And then you see it, and it exists. And he says, oh, I like this part of having a guide inside. That's very reassuring, he said. Very reassuring. And he's noticing, I said, what have you noticed? He said, well, I used to get really nervous when I had lots of homework to do. And now I realized I don't have to pay attention to those thoughts about how much I have. And I'm getting my homework done much more efficiently. And I'm being much nicer to my sister. And I'm not waking up in the morning a good part of the time with everything looking really dark around me and kind of negative. He says, this is really cool stuff, Doctor. He's excited. We're now halfway through the chapter on thought. 12 years old. we're all made of truth. And when you speak truth to truth, it resonates.
Can you hear me?
And Elisa, please, we can hear you now.
Okay. I haven't. I'm new to this, and I have been under a lot of stress, and I have, sold my house and no job, and I'm sitting in some summer house I lent from a friend, and I'm trying to, heal myself. But I have I think a lot of my friends are worried about me, and I said I'm okay, and I'm trying to say why I'm okay, but I have a very difficult in explaining why I'm okay. Can you give me some hint to how can I assure my family and friends that I'm okay? They think I'm going mad because I talk very different from what I'm used to.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't have any idea at all. And now, I have a direction to point you. That have you read Mr. Banks's books?
Yes.
Which ones have you read? All 6?
No, I've read the Enlightened Gardener and number 2, and I've seen the videos, and I read the Marie-Louise's book and Natasha's book. I think that's it. Okay.
Yeah, I would just encourage you to continue. And you've watched the Long Beach tapes on the 3PGC, the ones that are 35 to 40 minutes?
Yes, and a lot of videos on.
Videos. Good. Okay. Yeah, I would say in a quiet moment that you're in touch with the love you have for your parents. You'll either find something way to write it down, your thoughts, or you'll find a way to communicate it to them that they'll know that you're okay. And but here's the deal: we don't have control over how other people react or respond. All we can do, kind of like Chris said, all we can do is love them, and love eventually gets through to people. If you're not reactive to their reactions, instead when they react and you just kind of reassure that wisdom will guide you as how to reassure them. You really will, in a quiet mind. You're not going to find it from analytically trying to figure it out. It's going to come in a moment of quiet that you'll say, "Gosh, why didn't I think of that before?" Right? We've all had. Have you had those moments?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I'm alone a lot to try to love myself and find my way. So that's why they are very worried for the time.
As you continue your journey, it certainly sounds like you're going in the right direction. And I always tell people direction is the key. Sid made a very good point of that, and Harry, feel free to chime in. But Sid would say, don't try to force understanding. Don't try, in a way, he'd say, don't try to learn more. He'd say, just listen for truth and look for beautiful feelings. And as you have more and more gratitude in your heart and more satisfaction, then that, I love that state in the last chapter. I was reading it with somebody from Europe who's come out of 43 years of depression. And it says, gratitude and satisfaction have wonderful effects on our souls. They open our minds, clearing the way for wisdom and contentment to enter. Once you become grateful, the prison bars of your mind will fall away, and peace of mind and contentment will be yours. That's from The Missing Link, which I encourage you to get a copy if you can. but yeah, you're going in the right direction, and it's better to be going 3 miles an hour in the right direction versus 85 miles an hour in the other direction, or 85 kilometers or 100 kilometers per hour in the other direction, right? It's better to, direction is the key, and you can tell you're going in the right direction. You'll see, you're gonna be fine. I remember I've had parents, they say, what do I say to my 17-year-old daughter, you know? And I'd say, hey, she's your daughter, not mine. You get in touch with a quiet mind and the love you have for her, and you will know that the words will come out of your mouth and they'll be said in a way that will touch her heart. You know, you love your parents. You'll be fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we just jump in, or do I have to raise my hand?
Jump in.
Okay.
Hi. Do you say Esben?
Yeah, Esben. That's right.
Yeah.
I heard, I think a couple of months ago, I heard on Hay House, Michael Neal. He was guested by someone. I don't remember if it was you, Pettit, talking about stress.
Probably. I was on Michael's radio show not too long ago, a couple of 3 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and
somebody else too.
If I remember correctly, you said that all mental illnesses is caused by stress.
Chronic mental stress, which is chronic activation of this emergency system. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the mental diagnoses that we throw on people like depression or schizophrenia or anxiety disorder, it describes where the person is, Esben. It has nothing to do with who the person is. Nothing. Because who everybody is divine energy in disguise, utilizing divine energy to go through life. Now, if I'm stressing out about stuff so that I'm having 4 panic attacks a day because I'm activating the emergency system that shoots noradrenaline into my body, and it gives me all these physical symptoms to try to wake me up to the fact that I'm misusing these gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness, then I have no problem with somebody labeling me as depressed. I mean, as having a panic disorder, because that would describe where I was. It wasn't who I was. I went in and out of clinical depression for 21 years, from age 20 to 41, often almost immobilized, unable to function, barely made it out of college, barely made it out of medical school, barely made it out of my residency, played hell with the first 10 years of my marriage to my late wife. Somebody is unmuted that's talking. Somebody is unmuted. Can you hear me? Yeah. Anyway, but I didn't know any better. I don't feel any guilt about that. When I sat and listened to Mr. Banks, I suddenly realized I had been creating this stress inside of me with my thinking. It wasn't from the external things that I thought they were from. Now, that was an exciting day for me, Esben, because I had little or no control over those things external to me. So if they were causing me my stress, then, I was screwed. But if I was doing it myself, there was a chance that I might learn how to stop doing it to myself. And that was incredibly hopeful and exciting. So let me listen more. I hope I didn't start answering without having a clear sense of your question.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay, good. No, you answered it perfectly. have you worked with people with ADHD?
I have. I've raised 2 children with ADHD.
Oh.
And they were both adopted. Not surprisingly, the rate of ADHD is about 6% in the general population. Among adopted children, it's close to 1/3. Because oftentimes there are from unions of 2 people, often both with ADHD, who aren't thinking about the consequences of what happens. So yeah, I've worked with ADHD, and I'm not an anti-medication ADHD medication person, because if your brain is going 180 miles an hour or 120 or 150 instead of 60, some people have the ability to turn that around on their own. Other people, in my experience, even trying to teach them the principles, the medication slows that down to where they can read Mr. Banks's books, they can listen to his tapes, and then I've had people come to me and taper themselves, can they taper themselves off my ADHD medicine, and they've been fine, because their mind has quieted to such a degree that their ADHD they now use as an alarm system. When they start misplacing things or forgetting things, it's an alarm system that, yeah, I've been worrying about this, or I've been stressing. It's become a helpful thing to them. So yes, I have, in answer to your question, many people.
So do they become normal after they see how it works?
Well, normal is terribly overrated. It's terribly overrated. You know, normal just means where most people are. And if you took the normal bell curve in the United States, at least, I know Denmark, you got all that, this hoogie there and this happiness. We in the United States, we don't have much hoogie. We need visitors like Natasha and John to come over and teach us about Sverdlov, to teach us about hoogie. And my friend from Denmark too. But the normal in the United States, as I've traveled around the United States all over, and other countries too, the normal is about 75% of the people are about 70% stressed. So that's what normal is. I don't want to be normal. I want to be healthy. And do people become more healthy as they get a deeper understanding of the principles? Absolutely. Whether they have a processor. People with ADHD are incredibly creative. I mean, if you ever saw Bill Gates's boardroom back 20, 30 years ago, you'd see these guys, nobody could sit still. They're rocking, they're up on the back of their chairs, they're down. They're brilliant people. Their minds go places. You couldn't do things like Pixar and some of these things because people's minds go places where other people's minds don't even go. So people with ADHD, to me, are incredibly creative. They're incredibly resourceful. They're incredibly loving. But if they don't have some understanding, the difficulties or the proclivity to inattention and hyperactivity rules them rather than them using those gifts for the full potential of their creative abilities. Does that make any sense? Or
yeah,
it's really important what Bill said. We label people and label situations. We don't know what their gifts and talents are. There are tons of these outside scenarios look like they're dominating the people, but it isn't. That's not the truth. Bill doesn't know what's inside the person. He knows there's great unlimited gifts and potential within every human being, but he doesn't exactly know what he's trying to create or form, because he's not doing that. He's just letting them uncover their own mental health and happiness. If we put a label on someone, and that's probably the biggest problem in the world right now, everybody's labeling everybody else with what they think. You cannot teach the 3 principles if you label people. You have to see, you have to talk to the spirit inside them and connect. And with that connection, something will come out. And I haven't seen anybody who doesn't have unlimited potential that I have dealt with anyway.
But Esben, in answer to your question, like I remember I could tell a number of stories, but I've had people in their 60s who had never been treated for their ADHD, and were on Valium and all kinds of other medications. And once I gave them a little bit of medicine for their ADHD, their mind quieted down, and they got off all the antidepressants and the Valium and everything else. And then they could start to learn about the principles. I had one young man who had gotten his degree in IT and computers, but he said, I probably studied 7 hours for every hour that my colleagues studied. He said they would go out drinking on Friday and Saturday night, and I studied 7 or 8 hours every Friday and Saturday night because it was harder with his attention problem. Now, he said that if your speed of your thinking, the average person is about 60 miles an hour, what do you think yours is? And he said probably 180 miles an hour. I started him, and I know there are people in the Tre Principles that just hate it when I talk about medications, but the universal mind gave us these to be used wisely too. And I gave him a little bit of medication. It's called Vyvanse in the United States. And he texted me 72 hours later and said, today is my birthday, just 31 or 32. This is the most incredible gift that I have ever had in my entire life, because I can now finish one thought before I have another one. And I had another woman that had the same thing, had put her kids to bed, and she said, for the first time in my life when I sat down, I had absolutely nothing on my mind. My mind was quiet. So to me, I think the medications for ADHD can sometimes really, really help people. Now, there's some recent studies out that after a number of years, they're not that effective. And I'm not surprised, because what they are is to give us a chance for the person to slow down enough to learn something. And some people rightly have concerns about medicines. They say, well, if you give them medicine and they're no longer, so uncomfortable, then they're no longer motivated to learn. And some aren't. But I'm still about relieving pain. When somebody's life is so chaotic that they just can't take care of their children, or they can't do their job, they've lost their 14th job in a row in the last 5 years because of their impulsivity or their hyperactivity or their inability to pay attention, then I want to help them. I want to help them have a gentler life. And then when their mind is slowed, then their brain has slowed down, when their computer is working at a healthier pace, then I can motivate them to learn something, to learn the Tre Principles, to learn what they are and how they're functioning. So that's just the way I see it. I don't claim it to be right. It's just what Bill Pettit sees after 75 years and 48 years as a physician. Is that helpful, Isman?
Yeah, it's very helpful. It resonates a lot with me.
Good.
I got a second question. I don't know if it's the same word in English, but people with Asperger.
Mm-hmm.
Does it work the same with them? I know their brain is wired differently. You have to be very concrete with them. You can't talk abstract with them. They don't understand it, and they have it difficult socially because of yeah, also that they don't understand other people. They have to, their life has to be very boxed and told to do every minute of the day have to be told what to do.
Do you have a question there? Or is that just a statement?
Yeah, I have a question. Have you worked with people with Asperger?
I have to some degree, although it's not an area of specialization. I wish I remembered his name. There was a fellow in Washington, D.C. who's been teaching the principles to people with Asperger's and along the autism spectrum for probably 25 years, and has stories just like I have in the mental illness field of miraculous stories. Now, have I seen some of the incredible things happen? Yeah. And it's funny, I'll refer you to, there's a chapter in a book called Born to Love by Bruce Perry, who's an incredibly loving child and adolescent psychiatrist. And in one of his chapters on Asperger's and autism, he really explains a lot of the research. But I will tell you this: there was an article it was in the United Kingdom about 5 years ago now, where it was very controversial because there was 23 people that had met significant diagnoses for autism and Asperger's, which is even a milder form. It's not even an official diagnosis in the new DSM-5. And then these 23 people had as adults in their 20s, they literally did not they didn't even come close to meeting criteria. So they were very puzzled. They were very puzzled as to how that could happen. Now, I would love to see those 23 people. I would say those 23 people had some insights that allowed them to live with that processor that they have in a very different way. You know, the research has always said that people were kind of asocial. But there was some very sophisticated research that I saw recently that showed that it wasn't that they were asocial because they didn't want to connect with people. It was that their processor, they were creating so much stress in their head that they had to use every bit of their ability to try to not be stressed, and it left no room for them to connect with other people. It's groundbreaking research because it shows that they're not antisocial any more than has anybody besides me ever gotten themselves so stressed that if you watched me, I would look pretty damn antisocial because I had no freaking interest in anybody else's needs except my own. I think we've all been there. We've all been Asperger's at times. It's a state of mind. Now, because of their processor, it takes some psychological and spiritual understanding for them to understand how to have their internal experience. Mr. Banks, one of the statements that you'll often hear, he said, if people could only learn to not be afraid of the experience that they're creating, it would change their life. But once you realize that the only person that can create experience for you is in the same underwear that you're in, and the last time I looked, there's only room for one in mine. Once you realize that you're the only one creating the experience, then when you have an experience that you don't like, you know you're creating it. You allow your mind to quiet down, and the experience gets better. And it doesn't matter whether you have the label, as Harry said, the label of Asperger's or narcissist or paranoid or whatever. If you learn that, if you have an insight that allows you to see that your experience is coming from you, one thought at a time. This is universal. Every one of the 7 billion people in the world right now are using universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness to create their experience one thought at a time. There are no exceptions. You can put whatever labels you want on somebody. It doesn't change. There's no exceptions. These are universal principles.
And you know what else? While you were talking about this serious thing, the funniest thing popped into my head. The first thing I tell people with the heavily addicted, because they're doing exactly what you just described, Bill. The first thing I always say is, lighten up.
Right.
You're too heavy, too serious about your, lighten up. And that's 40% of the problem with being heavily addicted, or what that thing that you were describing. I can't even remember the name of it, but people are too heavy into their problem.
Life is too important to take seriously. It's way too important to take seriously. Remember what Einstein said, the intuitive mind. He knew this was 30 years before Sid had, 25 years before Sid had his experience. Einstein, the greatest scientist of 1,000 years, said the intuitive mind, which is doing his best to describe the manifestation of wisdom from universal mind, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. It's given to everyone. The rational analytical mind, its faithful servant. However, Einstein said, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. One of my favorite things, Esmond, is I will take a whiteboard or a big whiteboard or a flip chart, and I will take a pen with a very fine thing, and I will put a little dot on there, and in all this white space, I'll put a little dot. And I'll say, does anybody want to know what that represents? And they say, well, what does it represent? I say, well, it represents that little dot that you can't see. Make that into a sphere. Pretend it's a sphere, and it's inside of Wembley Stadium in the UK, and they've placed a dome over Wembley Stadium, and that little dot is floating around in Wembley Stadium. And that little dot represents, that little sphere represents what Bill Pettit knows after 75 and a half years of living and 26 and a half years of formal education. And all the space around that little dot represents what Bill Pettit doesn't know. And I'm suggesting to you that that would be a gross over-representation of what I know versus what I don't know. But for 41 years of my life, whenever I got into a situation in my life where I didn't know the answer, guess where I kept going to? Anybody? That little sphere.
What you knew.
What I knew. It didn't matter that if my computer was well programmed, it would say, Bill, watch my lips. I do not know the answer to this question. So I would be willing to go into the unknown, where wisdom works and is functional, intuitive mind. The unknown has gotten a really bad reputation. I'm telling you, folks, it's where all the answers are. That's where Sid went. He was allowed to go into the unknown and come back with knowing. That's where Einstein went. That's where you and I know, those of us that have been parents, at the times that we haven't been reactive to our children, instead we were just present with them with love, we suddenly found something that we were doing or saying to our child that was exactly what was needed, and we had no idea where it had come from. because the experience is that it's coming through you, not from you. I've been around Harry enough that I know his work with the Native American community and the heavily addicted and even the lightly addicted, even them, and the medium addicted. All of them. I know there's times that Harry is quiet and he, even as he speaks, he's experiencing something coming through him rather than from him. We all have had, I bet everybody on this call has had that experience in your work, whether it's as a teacher, as a nurse, or as a data analyst, or whatever. You just suddenly see what to do next, and the unknown becomes known. And that's available to us 24/7. And that's really cool, as my 12-year-old patient says. That is really cool. That I don't have to go into that analytical, rational thing and go round and round in circles and wonder why I'm spiraling down. Dr. De La Sandri, who brought Judy Sedgman and I to West Virginia University, one of his favorite metaphors that I used to use, and it was from my days in the flights as a flight surgeon training. We as a Navy flight surgeon, they gave us flight training for the first 3 months of the Navy flight. We had 3 months of flight training. When they take you in a Cessna T-34, it's fully aerodynamically stable. So they take you up in this T-34, and the instructor would say, now we're at about 8,000 feet, and he would check the airspace, and he said, now watch, I'm going to stall out the airplane. I'm going to put us into a stall, and then we're going to go into an inverted spin, and we're going to be going down like this towards the earth. So I want you to know that at 5,000 feet, when we get to about 5,000, I'm going to get us out of the inverted spin. Now I want you to watch and see what I do to get us out of the inverted spin, so that you, if you ever accidentally, which you can do, stall your plane out and go into it, you will know what to do. Okay? So he'd stall the plane out, and then you start going down like this. And I'm telling you, I'm going, why did I think being the Navy flight surgeon was a good idea? This is not going to end well here. And when we got to 5,000 feet, does anybody know what he did to get us out of the spin? He took his hands completely off the controls. And because the Cessna T-34 is fully aerodynamically stable, it goes whoosh, and it comes out flat, straight, and level. You do give it just a little left rudder as it comes out, and you're on your way. He does that twice. Second time, he does it again. And you said, watch me. Takes his hands off. Whoosh! Straight and level. Engine starts up again, no problem. Now, the third time, guess whose turn it is? It's the students. Guess what happens at 5,000 feet with most students? They won't let go. No, I got us into this. I can get us out. I think we're almost out of this spin. He's had to rip people's hands off to save both their lives from crashing to the ground, because they didn't trust letting go and being not in control, and knowing that there was complete control within that airplane. Do people hear the lesson there? We keep trying to figure it out when we don't know, or we're instead of letting go and let wisdom guide us. All wisdom is a manifestation of universal mind. that's available every moment of our life as a spiritual force. But if we don't know it, we're going to crash and burn a few times. And believe me, I crashed and burned more times than I wish. There's times when I'm talking to this 12-year-old boy that I go, wow, my life would have been a lot gentler if I had learned this at 12. And then I think not only my life, but a whole lot of people around me, their life would have been a lot gentler had I learned this when I was 12. But I'm just grateful I learned it at 41.
Well, this seems a good place, Bill. I think that was a beautiful metaphor. Absolutely, I could feel the feeling. People really flew with you with that metaphor. And I feel like we're full now, and unless someone has another question, and we can move on. Just to let you know, next week will be the spiritual nature of the principles, and then Meta Louise will be coming on, I think, at the end of the month, and that will be in Danish. So just to let you know that. And Bill, fantastic. That was very, very beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to have to really do a crash course in Danish if I'm going to be on that one at the end of the month. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I hope to eventually, but thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to unmute everyone so you can say goodbye and thank you. And thank you very much, Bill. And I'm stopping the recording now.